Dawson, and I live here with Jack Kittredge, and this is Many Hands Organic Farm. We've been here since 1982. We have just started doing workshops every month, actually, now. Hi, Norma. And we had our 5 risky decisions was in January, and in February we did fruit trees, and in March we did small fruit. And this is our mushroom workshop, and then next month we're going to do, on the 8th, we're going to do starting seeds in the greenhouse, through the hoop house, into the ground, that whole seed starting piece. So Claire and I will present that one. Thank you to all of you who gave us money today. The Many Hands Sustainability Center is something we started in 2007, and it was really really educate. Our purposes are to educate people about sustainable farming, living, etc. systems. And we also, for many years, worked with former prisoners here working on the farm, and also with a close connection with the Dismas House. We aren't doing that right now, but we continue to work with Stetson School in town, which is a school for, I call them bad boys, 24/7 bad boys. And they come out once or twice a week. They just restarted again. They've been off and on with COVID. And I think we're going to actually hire Krishan, I think is going to start Monday. So he's on his way out of Stetson into the big bad world. So he'll be working for us for a while. But so sometimes we hire those kids from Stetson when they're on the way out the door too. So that's what we do with your money. So thank you. And this is Cathleen. And she is the mushroom queen, and she's going to do most of the talking today, and I'm just going to be hanging around and being a support person.
So I prefer mushroom princess. I'm not quite ready for queendom, but so I'll do my introductions after we all go around, but I'd like everyone just to say their name, what town you're from, and then just something you'd like to learn today. So hopefully I can at least teach everybody one little thing. I have been plugging shiitake bolts, which are what these little logs are called, since 2014, and growing them pretty successfully since then. Most of my experience is with shiitake. I've done some other spawn indoors, failed miserably at oysters. We'll talk about that later, why I failed. So this is really my wheelhouse, but I do have experience with some of the other mushrooms. I also manage a farmer's market, and so I have good sources for lots of local spawn that you can get, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we have a lot of material to kind of get through in 2 hours. So what I want to make sure that everybody gets to do everything that they want to do. So if you do want to go home, for me, I started off doing a workshop with Steve Gabriel, who's out of Cornell, and kind of the same thing. I was like, oh, this is great, I love this, and then didn't do anything for a couple of years until a girlfriend of mine had been cultivating, and so she and I bought all the tools, and then I've been doing it ever since. So I have a lot of wooded areas, so this is a perfect place for us, but I find that anyone, if you have the north side of a shed, garage, house that stays pretty shady and get some water, you can grow a few logs. So I feel like this is a great medium for a lot of people. And then we can also talk about spawn later if you want to try to do some stuff indoors. So this is kind of the setup that we like to do. One, it's the reason I set it up this way is because it's easy on the back. So all you have to do is at least get the log up here, and then it's pretty much you roll it down. I set up 2 stations so that way people can have some space to work, but you don't necessarily need 2 spaces, but since we're so many, I thought it'd be helpful for us. So the first thing we do is plug, and then we use the spawn. Sounds good. Today we're using these little plugs that have been pre-inoculated. Personally, I tend to use spawn. It's just sawdust that's been inoculated. 1, because it's cheaper, and 2, because we're only doing about 40-50 logs a year. I find that this is not cost effective for us. A lot of growers who are using these are usually doing hundreds, thousands of logs if they're not using a pneumatic setup. So, but it's up to you. This is a little easier because you just need a hammer, which most people have. Otherwise, I'll show you some of the tools that I use with the Sawdust Spawn. So you need a couple other things if you're not going to use these plugs. So this is real simple. Anthony, will you hand me a hammer? I got a hammer. So this is real simple. When we get to this part, all you do is put the plug in the little hole and then hammer it in. The reason this works so easily is because we set up with an angle grinder. Again, not everyone needs an angle, sorry about that. You don't need an angle grinder, but if you really want to do this, I suggest making the investment. It's super fast. We have an adapter and a bit that has a collar on it, so it stops. It's the perfect size. Otherwise, you're talking about taping off and, so again, if you're going to do a couple logs a year, you might not necessarily need to do this, but if you want to do more than that, I suggest getting it. You can definitely use other types of drill. You can use a hand drill. You can make it as antique as you want to, but this is what we use. So like I said, it's the angle grinder, there's an adapter, and then a bit. This bit is specifically for these plugs, so it's the exact diameter and depth. If you're using sawdust, which I'll show you in a minute, it's a different bit, just because it's a little bit wider, but basically it's the same process. So I'll show you how to do that. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about sources when we go through this, and I can also email folks sources too, so you don't have to write it down or try to remember it. So that's the plugging. That's pretty simple. And then the last thing that we do is waxing. So the wax, I can show everybody when we kind of go through each step. This is just cheese wax that we're using. You can use paraffin or beeswax, but it's not recommended. This wax will hold up. Lots of critters and things like to get into beeswax. So again, you can use what you have, but I suggest using the cheese wax. It's not too expensive, and you can find it in different ways. Anthony, if you look in that box over there, what we ordered were just single pound bags that were already pelletized, granulated, so they melt very simple or easily. So Anthony, you can pass that around. And my husband and I like to use blocks. We buy 5-pound blocks at a time. And the last time I bought those was 2014, so we just had to buy 10 more pounds. So, that went through, 7 years of plugging. So it lasts a good long time. And again, it's a little more cost effective. So if you want ease, I would recommend that. If you want something that, is going to be cheaper, I'd recommend the blocks. So Anthony, we also, in that box, you'll see there's a couple inoculating tools. Yeah, so if you're going to use the sawdust, which is again not what we're using today, it just comes in a bag. You can get a 2.5-pound bag or 5-pound bag. That's generally what people sell it at. And then you would use those inoculating tools, and you can pass those around if you want, so people can see. Those are two different styles. One is you can use as a single hand. You just use your finger, and I can show folks how that works if you want. And then the other one, you kind of punch down with your hand. Yes, ma'am.
Do you reuse the logs year after year?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about logs. We can do that now. So the logs that we have here are oak, shiitake, like oak and maple. Again, you can use other types of wood, but they like a real hardwood, and this is going to be your most effective use. So there are other wood types that you can use, but they're not as compatible. So like when the oysters that we tried, we used ash with oyster, and it was the least compatible wood out there. So we spent all the time plugging them and got nothing, and we still have nothing. So that's why I say, use what they recommend, and you'll, get good results. So we were just using ash because that's what we had, and whatever, it was an afternoon wasted, but good lesson learned. So these, like I said, are called bolts. These little log pieces, and you can do, this is a good diameter. They say they recommend 3 to 6 inches. I find that the bigger diameter you go, it's not really as effective. I feel like they just don't produce as well, and they're also just like crazy heavy. So if you can, I think this is a good size. This one here is a little small. They tend to rot out very quickly, but use what you have. So this is a great size. 3 to 6 feet is what they say to use for the bolts. This length is a little short, and I'll show you when we get up to the mushroom yard. The reason we cut them like this is because these fit into our water tanks. So if you are going to force mushrooms, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get up to the mushroom yard, just make sure that you're cutting lengths that actually fit for what the tanks you're using. So if anyone wants to come in, or I can pass these around, I can pass this around. This one's a little bit
Are these
easy.
all oak or not? Looks like they're mixed.
We tried to get all oak. They might be mixed. We were cutting these down in the winter. I have a couple of books over on the picnic table about bark identification. It is not my forte. I'm not an ecologist. But we tried to get all oak. If someone knows.
I thought we had a little maple in there.
Yeah, it looks like maybe these might be maple, but yeah. So as you see, as I'm passing around this bolt, the pattern we're trying to do is 4 to 6 inches, and then 2 inches from there. So it creates kind of a diamond pattern. A lot of folks kind of start to fret about the pattern, and if you get a little bit off, it's okay. It's just kind of like the optimum. So you're not putting in too much spawn or not putting in enough spawn. So again, if you get it too close or too far apart, it's okay, but you might not have the flush that you're looking for. So so that's the sort of pattern, and we can go through with the angle grinder in a second. Briefly, these are very simple, but everybody can try these. And when we get one of these done, I'll show everybody how to wax. The biggest key when you're waxing is that you want to get a nice, good cover. I'll pass this one around to you. You'll see that the dowels are recessed below the hole, and that's key because it gets a nice pool with the wax, and there's full coverage over the hole. So if you have holes or cracks, that's easy for insects or other things to get in there. So that's kind of key when you're waxing. It's a very easy process, but it's also easy to not do it well. If you're taking the time, make sure all your holes are fully sealed and waxed. Any questions so far? All right, do folks want to start trying some things? All right, great. So I pre-drilled some things, so if there's anybody who wants to start with plugging with dowels, there's a few different buckets of the dowels here and some hammers. So like I said, it's pretty simple. Because we're using this bit, it's the perfect size. So all you do is just put it in and then hammer it down. Again, ideally it's going to be recessed a little bit, but that may not always be the case. That's okay, and we can talk about how to wax that if it's not fully recessed. So that's that part. And once we get a few bolts inoculated, then we can go ahead and do the waxing. Who wants to start off with drilling? Yeah, Jim. Oh yeah, right. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah. So the bolts, we cut these in March, so it's been a little over a month. Your ideal window for seasoning the logs is 2 to 6 weeks. So you want them to at least rest for 2 weeks, and ideally not be any older than 6 weeks. If you have wood from last year, don't use that. So this is the perfect time. Well, it's a little bit late now because you can see some of the trees are starting to bud out. When the trees are budding out, then you want to wait. So you want to wait till the fall, or at least after the leaves have come out. That way it's better for the tree and you don't have other competing things. But ideally you're doing it in February, March, sometime during the dormant season.
And the reason you want to let them rest for a little bit of time, but not too much, is that some local fungi will come in, but you don't want them, if you let it rest too long, too much local fungi will come in and they'll compete with it.
Yeah, so they're kind of curing, they're drying out a little bit, but nothing is competing. And we'll show you up in the mushroom yard, when you do cut your bolts, you don't want them to rest directly on the ground while they're curing. You want there just to be a little buffer zone between the ground and your logs. Yeah, you could try to use a tarp. We like to just use like 1-bys or something if you have a pallet. You do want to keep them low to the ground. because you don't want them to dry out fully. But yeah, that's the best way. Any other questions there before we start using the power tools? All right, cool. So Lori, if you want to roll that down a little bit, or you could take it over to that side.
Okay.
The angle grinder does put up a bit of sawdust, so be careful on these small lugs. This is spacing is a little tight, so. So again, when we're doing this, I'll just step in here for a real quick second and show everybody. This just turns on and off. You can use this if you want. I tend to do it one-handed just because that way I can hold on to the log and roll it. So you just turn it on. Use safety glasses if you want. I always use head earphones. I had safety. Oh, there. Thank you, Ari.
So that's an angle grinder.
And there's some of those down there for other folks if they want to use them. Oh, my mic. All right. So again, you just turn it on, and then, before I start, sorry. So you want to leave a few inches at the end of the log. That way, this area tends to dry out. And again, it's not like you can't put a hole there and plug it, but most likely it's going to dry out and be wasted. So I always leave a couple inches. That way you can also too, when you're stacking it, again, when we go to the mushroom yard, I'll explain this more, you have a space to stack it. So you just kind of go a couple inches in and then start your pattern. So like I said, I start off, go across about 4 to 6 inches. I tend to do about 4 inches. You want to keep the angle grinder at 90 degrees if possible. And then I come back in and fill in the rest of the pattern. That's about right. I could probably put in another one here if I wanted. You can see this is about 2 inches, but then you go from here and that's a little bit farther, so I may put in a few extra holes. So that's about that. When you turn off the angle grinder, it's a very powerful tool, so just have it upright just so it doesn't spin on everything. And that's basically it. Is any questions there? Yes, Cindy.
So if you just had a basic drill and an array of drill bits, what would you use? Like what size would you use and length?
So I can show you what size this is. I think it's, is it 5/16? Yeah, there's 2 different sizes. This is a new one for me, but I can show you the catalog that has that in there. You want to go about 1 inch deep. So if you're just using a normal bit, I would tape it off or something so that you know where to stop. Like I said, these bits aren't that expensive. I think this was like 18 bucks. Guess it depends on what world where that's expensive or not. But you know, like we invested in a bit in 2014 and just bought another one, and we've done hundreds of logs. So it seems really worth the investment, and you're getting the right depth every time with very little effort. So, but yeah, you can use a bit. You would just tape it off to make sure you're at the right depth. Any other questions there? All right, so when we get a few, or do we have any fully inoculated over there?
I think we've got one ready for waxing.
Okay, so I'll just show you waxing real quick, and then everybody can jump in and do some stuff. So there are a couple of different things that you can use for waxing. So this is just like a tiny crock pot that we have. It's a little small. We can basically do a few bolts at a time, but it's nice and it melts pretty quickly. The key when you're melting the wax is keep it at a low temperature. Otherwise it's going to scald. So just keep it at a low temperature. These are daubers that are specifically made for this. But you can also, like I bought these for us, you can use. Some people use paintbrushes, you know. I like these a lot. They're really absorbent. And again, you know, I bought a pack of 100 like 7 years ago and we still have them. So it's up to you what you want to use. But what you do is you just kind of like tap it over the top and it cools very quickly so you can see how well you've done. So what I usually do is like go down a line, tap some. If the wax is good and melted, you don't need too much wax. But when you look at it, again, you want to make sure that it's fully covered. So I'll try to do one that's not. Let's see. I've been doing this too long, so okay. Here you go. Here's a. So here's an example, and folks can come in and look at that if they want. That middle one, you'll see there's like a little hole there. That's what you want to avoid. So, like I said, usually what I do is go down and do a line, see how it's cooled, see how it's pooled, and then I'll come back in and refill it. But that one is obvious from the beginning. You want to make sure it's just good and covered. So, yeah. I mean, I don't think so. If you over wax, you're just going to waste your wax. So it doesn't hurt anything. Yeah. And some folks even wax the ends of their bolts, which I have never done.
Why would you do that? Just to keep the moisture in?
Exactly. And, you know, but that's why I jump in a little bit on the bolt because we know that this is going to dry out. So, you know, that's up to you. That seems like a lot of time and effort that I personally don't want to spend. Hey, Eric. But I found that if you do jump in a little bit, that's not necessary. Folks also recommend that all this lichen is not on the bolt. And sometimes if it's like really heavily covered, I'll sort of do like a quick brush off. But again, I haven't found that it's really affected our logs. So any other questions about the waxing? The reason this is sort of pink is because we had some red cheese wax. So now it's kind of cool and pink. But yeah, you can get red or white. And again, I can go over sources at the end where we can talk about where you can get some of this stuff from. Cheese wax is pretty readily available. Any questions? So the cool thing about these is, and I'll show you, I have this other, are you gonna get the wax? Yeah, thanks. You can actually bend these out and so then they can like rest in whatever container you're using, which is just kind of a nice fun feature. So yeah, I think we can jump in. Like I said, there's headphones over there. There's some safety glasses for folks who want to try the angle grinder. And otherwise, there's a bunch of different buckets with the dowels. And I think just like if we're going to do the dowels over here, then we'll roll it this way for the wax. Yeah, any questions? Hi.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
That's maple, right? Not oak.
Some of it, we tried to get mostly oak, but it looks like some of it is maple. Yeah.
So how many more cycles can you get out of maple than out of oak? Or, I mean, doesn't oak provide more fruiting over the years than maple?
I don't know anything about that. 3 to 5 years is generally how long the bolts last.
Even for maple?
Yeah, we've done both and it's been about the same. But if you know, I don't know that maple or oak is, one is better than the other.
Okay,
So
the oak generally has a thicker bark, so I thought it might last longer.
yeah, I have not found that to be true.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good
And then
question.
another question is it too late to take down some oaks now?
So where do you live?
Petersham.
So I was telling folks, once your trees start budding out,
Yeah.
then you're past your time.
Okay,
So
it's too late.
yeah, you can start dropping trees again when stuff is leafed out, but I would wait till the fall if I was you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, have at it. Mushroom yard. It has been kind of ignored for a few years, so we're bringing it back to life. And the ideal mushroom yard is deciduous forest, or not deciduous, evergreen coniferous forest. So we have a little mix here, which is why you see all this sort of dappled sunlight. But if you have evergreens, put your logs in there. Right now, because there's no leaves out, the logs are sort of drier than they want to be. So that's why you want to keep something that's fully shaded. You can also invest in shade cloth, which is, like basically a blanket for your trees. So those are sort of ways you can get around it if you don't have full shade, but that's the optimum. So these are our old logs. Normally what I like to do in the wintertime to keep the humidity high is have the logs lower to the ground. These are referred to what is called a crib stack. This is an easy harvesting method. So once the mushrooms start fruiting, I like to put them back up like this. Otherwise, I like to just keep them on a pallet or like a 1x, low to the ground. And that's what I would recommend while they're in your inoculation stage. So right after you plug them, you keep them really low to the ground. The logs, they recommend about an inch of rain a week for the logs. In drier weather, you might want to water them. It's not necessarily necessary, but it depends on like how you want to manage your logs, like for optimum production or not. So we are forcing some of these logs, and we're doing basically a little bit at a time because of the number of water tanks we have. We force them for 24 hours. We soak them overnight, and then we will put them back in this crib stack so that we can harvest them. And you do that in a 7-week rotation. So if you're going to force your logs, which is what that's called by soaking them, you want to do that every 7 weeks. So you don't have to do it like that. We also have the sprinkler system that we can use to water them if it's a sort of drought. My husband and I don't really do a lot of forcing at all. And we just kind of get a flush when it's a super heavy rain. It's the point that we have a few hundred logs now, so it's kind of getting a little bit much, because when we get a heavy flush, we have like 400 or 500 mushrooms all of a sudden, so we are going to start sort of staggering it. And that's okay for us because we're basically dehydrating them. We sell some at market when we have a lot, and we give a lot away. So, but if you're trying to invest in this, it is a good method to do the shocking, so that way you can kind of have a staggered harvest. And especially if you're selling to restaurants or something like that, they're going to want to have you, have mushrooms on a schedule. So, like I said, that's the water system, the crib. These over here are poplar totems that we're going to inoculate with the oysters. They like a softer hardwood, so that's why we're using the poplar. You can use maple oak, but the poplar is sort of ideal for that. Any questions about that? Yeah, Eric.
Can you force multiple strains of mushroom or just shiitake?
So that's a good question. A lot of folks use this sort of bolt method for other strains aside from shiitakes, but Gabriel, who I sort of got my start with, says that one of the reasons that you use the bolt method for shiitakes is because they are the only strain that responds to a force, so a force shock. So otherwise you're just wasting a lot of time. I can't verify that one way or the other because we mostly just grow shiitakes. But that's what he says, and he's a smart guy, so I'm not going to challenge him on that. So the oyster totems, that's why we're doing this sort of totem style, because it is a faster way to inoculate. Hopefully we'll get a flush in 4 to 12 months. The shiitakes, it takes about a year. We have had shiitakes fruit 6 months after we had a fruit in the fall after we did a plugging in the spring, but that's like one time that happened for us. So it's pretty standard, 12 to 18 months is what they say. Any questions there? So what we're going to do with the oyster totems is we're going to have 2 styles that we're going to try. So one, we're going to take the plastic bag, put it on the ground, and we're going to try to find a little shady area. If we can, maybe Anthony can sort of scout that out for us. We'll do it in a nice shady area, and we're going to put about an inch of sawdust on the bottom. So the oyster, so this is different than the plugs we were using before. So this is just the Sawdust Spawn, like I was talking about, the option that you have for the shiitakes. So when we open this up, it's just sawdust that's been inoculated, and then there's like some of them have wheat germ in it or something else basically to feed it, the mycelium. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to add about an inch to the bottom in between the plastic layer and the layer of wood. Then we'll do another inch on the next section, another inch, and then we'll top them off, and then we'll close them up. So we're going to do that with the plastic bags. And we're also going to try one that I've never done before, which is newspaper. We're going to wrap them in newspaper. So the newspaper we want to have wet, and then we'll just tie those off and see how that works. So we're gonna, that's something that people said that they've done. I've never tried it personally, but we're trying to do that because it's, no plastic that way. So those are the two styles that we're gonna try with these oyster totems. You can do totems for lots of different other types of strains, like chicken of the woods you can do it with. You can do it with shiitake. The lion's mane, a lot of folks do it like that with lion's mane. Trying to think some other ones. Hen of the woods. Yeah, and like I said, a lot of folks do the bolt method with shiitake because they do respond to the forcing. So aside from water shocking, you can also physically shock them. You can take like a hammer to the bottom of them and just whack them, which sort of simulates a tree falling to the ground. And usually in the springtime, my husband and I have like a spring that comes through the yard. So we just soak them in that. So it really doesn't have to be a water tank. It could be whatever sort of water source you have. Mushrooms are about 90% water, so you want to make sure it's a good, clean water source. So, if your neighbor down the road is spraying all sorts of stuff and you're getting that water from them downriver, I'd probably avoid it. But, if you have good, clean water, use what you have. Yeah, exactly. So be prepared, be careful of that. Any questions? Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing that I had all these totems set, like you can see this one, perfect matching pieces, but some of them kind of fell over, so we'll just have to try and match the right piece. Like this obviously doesn't match this. You can see that this is much smaller.
Do you want to try to match those up? Yeah. Do you want to try and match them up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll start with the ones that we know work.
So when the totems are set, where do they go in between the pieces?
Yeah, so we're going to do an inch on the bottom in between the plastic and the bottom of that log.
And then
An inch. Yep, exactly. And then we're going to, with the plastic bag, we'll wrap them up. Not too tight. We do want some airflow to be able to happen, but we don't want any water to get in. So you can tell when the mycelium has been affected because it'll be white on the outside, similar to this. So in about 4 months, we'll check and see how it's going and just keep checking to see how they're doing. The newspaper method, like I said, it's kind of a new one for me, so we're gonna figure that out together. I hope you guys are into that, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. But we'll start with the plastic bags because we know that that's easy to do, and so I think if some folks want to, if we have one that's, yeah, we cut these, like I said, about a month ago, so, squirrels and everybody has been in here to sort of disrupt us a little bit. So if we have one that's ready to go, Anthony, we'll start with that one.
Yeah, a bunch of them.
Okay, cool.
Kathleen,
Yep.
is there a time frame after you cut your logs that you need to inoculate within?
2 to 6 weeks.
2 to 6 weeks? All right.
Yeah. So these have been about a month. Yeah.
Do you recommend burying the very first piece into the ground?
So with this method, you do not want to bury it. You want there to be a layer in between the ground. But like, for example, we're doing, at my house, we're doing chicken of the woods this year, which I was just explaining to somebody. We actually have to pressure treat the wood or pressure cook the wood before we use it. So we're going to do like 8-inch chunks, pressure cook it. And then once we inoculate it, it will be buried. So it depends on what you're doing. But for this method, you don't want there to be contact with the ground.
And is the pressure cooker, it's not your average kitchen, right?
Oh yeah, it's an average kitchen. rice
So
cooker.
the totem, so the pieces of wood are small.
They're pretty small. They're
okay.
like about this or
You said
something.
pressure cooker, and I'm like,
No, yeah, no, it's definitely like a canner, yeah, canning in the fall, and
So are they like 8-inch cubes?
yeah, they'll be 8-inch rounds or whatever we can fit in there. Yeah, they have to pressure cook for a couple of hours, and then we'll inoculate them and then bury those. So that'll be fun. So let's try a couple of these, and then we can sort of talk about fast-growing mushrooms for folks who don't have shaded areas. And any other questions folks have? I don't have a ton of experience. I know some people talked about doing spawn inside the house. I have some experience doing indoor kits, but not really a lot of experience with spawn. I know that Jim and Kent, you have a little bit of experience with that, so if folks have questions about that. Otherwise, let's do some totems. Sound good?
so you want to take them over into the shade?
I think this is kind of in our way, so maybe just some, like this could be okay, just like a level ground, because we are going to cover them with the plastic, so just kind of out of our way. We're going to put them, we don't want them on a pallet. Yeah, I think just where you are, Jim, is probably good. Yeah. So you see there's all these logs, so some of them don't have the bark on them anymore. I'm not 100% confident that they're still going to fruit, but we're going to force them and see how they go. Some of these over here, these are sort of the dead bolts area. If you don't have much experience with them, you can pick them up. They're super light. So they're dried out. The spawn and everything else is eaten through it, so that's dead wood. A few years ago, I had a pile like this. Just was throwing logs into a pile and they fruited. So you know what I mean? It's like, don't ever give up hope on your mushrooms because they'll surprise you. Just keep them around, you know, like. Do what?
I would build a hugelkultur bed with
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, yeah, totally.
have some nutrients.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so if you want to come over here before we start, so these are some new mushrooms that are coming in. So that's basically what they look like. The first year that they start to fruit, they mostly come in the area where you have inoculated them, but you'll see that these are coming in just kind of all over, and that happens after you really can see that the mycelium has inoculated the whole log.
So the ones that we just did over there, you're going to bring them over here and do this, stack them?
So they're going to stay low to the ground
for a while.
for a year.
A year. And
Yeah.
then, okay.
Yeah, so that's the inoculation stage. We just want to keep them low to the ground. This is two different ways you can stack them when you're harvesting. This is called a crib stack. Otherwise, you can set up an A-frame style. But for an A-frame, like, you know, we don't have a lot of places to sort of lean it against. So this is sort of more efficient because you're talking about vertical height. At my house, we have a board that we put between two trees and then lean them up that way. There's pros and cons of both.
So what happens to those after they sit for a year? The ones we just did over there.
So they'll start fruiting, hopefully.
Start fruiting,
Yeah.
Then you harvest it.
And then you harvest it.
Okay.
And it's good times from there. Yeah. Yeah. So after they fruit, so in the wintertime, what I like to do is unstack the cribs and have them back low to the ground. So in the wintertime, you want to sort of drop them back down to the ground, again, to keep that humidity high.
So these are post-fruit.
So these, like I said, this yard was kind of ignored for a couple years. So these sat like this all winter. If I had been managing this, I would have dropped them all down to the ground over the winter. So that way you'd get a nice even snow cover. The humidity would stay super high.
They've dried out.
So we are soaking them in order to force a flush. Yeah. So you are going to get higher humidity for sure, but that's the reason that we are soaking them, is because we want to get a flush in 7 weeks. And also, like some of these, like this, you know, that seems pretty dead to me. It's got a little weight to it, but you can see like there's no wax on here. All the plugs have been eating out. You know, this whole crib is going to most likely be very unproductive. But they have a little bit of weight left to them, so we're going to force them and just see how they do. You can see this crib over here, the one in the middle, you know, it's got these beautiful new mushrooms on it. And it's got bark. You can see that, you know, the wax is kind of gone, but you can still see a full plug. So those are good looking logs. You know, there's that one's kind of a mix, right? You know, you see some that have the bark missing, and, you know, a lot of it with the logs, you know, I pick them up. You can see those ones over there. If you pick them up, you know, like a 2-year-old could pick them up. You know, there's just like no weight left to the logs. But these have a little weight left to them, so.
And so when it's sat like that for so long, other things don't come in, other fungi don't come in and take over because they're already full of shiitake, or?
So these are older, yeah. I think like it's less likely that something else is competing, and it's more likely that the shiitake have just eaten the whole log.
Okay.
You know, so I don't expect that. Yeah, this is competition from something else. I think that they just have done their job, and, you know, eaten all that they can, and there's just nothing left. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? So some of these logs you can see. Yeah, so whoever cut these before, he cut these wedges in here so that they would stack. I have never found that that's necessary. Jason. So, and it also, for me, it's like you're wasting a lot of wood that way. But, you know, that is, you can do that. Other things you can do, like with this totem method, if you have a large stump, you can cut wedges out of the stump, inoculate it. You put like, you know, about 1 inch of your sawdust in that, put the wedge back in, nail it in, and that way you can inoculate a stump that's already, you know, not dropped. So you can do that too. So there's like lots of different ways that you can do this. Again, folks like to do this with the shiitakes because they respond to a force flush. So if you're not going to force it, then you don't necessarily have to do all this. You can do these other methods. Any other questions?
Like, how do you tell if something's competing? Do you prevent competition, or is the plugging the idea that, like, it's going to be overwhelmingly shiitake as opposed to something else?
Yeah, good question. So that's why we have these on pallets. So if we had these resting on the ground, there would be lots of things competing with the shiitake spawn. One of the reasons, same thing with the wax, right? You want to get a good solid seal on the wax. You know, if you're not using plugs when you're doing the sawdust, you want to get a nice full hole, right? So you don't want to have, you know, a hole that's got this much space in it. Another thing, that's the pattern here. So this is kind of like Optimum. If you did fewer holes, you might have something else that comes in and gets your bolt before the shiitake does. So that's sort of the optimum there. Again, you can go close. You can go like every ½ inch if you want, but that's going to be way more than you need. You know, I was explaining to someone else, it's like, you know, pouring a glass full of water and then still pouring the water as it's overflowing. You know, it's like you've done your job. So, yes, that's sort of the optimum there. Yeah, does that answer your question?
And just to say also, we've not had problems with other mushrooms coming in. We've only seen shiitakes on them.
Yeah, a lot of times it'll be, you know, everything else that's living in the ground. You know, so worms will eat through, or the logs will rot faster. You know, it all depends. Yes, slug damage is a big issue, especially at my house when you're harvesting. You can do a lot of things to prevent slugs. We found that we put sand down underneath our cribs, and that has really eliminated a lot of slug damage because the sand sort of like scratches up their little bellies, and so they don't go on there. Yeah, whatever you have. A lot of people use gravel. That can be expensive. So, but that also helps too to keep them right off the ground with this. But, you know, slugs will climb. So that's definitely one of your biggest pests when you're doing the outdoor growing method, or slugs.
Kathleen, can you speak at all towards what strains of mushrooms you do and don't need to pre-treat? Like you said, you put some in the pressure cooker for the chicken of the woods. Is that just them, or are there several varieties you need to pre-treat your wood for, sterilize it, or?
That's a good question. So this was news to me. We had ordered a chicken of the woods just out of a whim, and I got it from the Fedco catalog. Didn't say anything about pressure cooking. And then I was reading Field and Forest, which is the Paul Stamets, his whole setup. And he's the one who recommended pressure cooking. And because he's kind of the king of mushrooming, I was like, well, let's try it, you know. So this is brand new to me. So yeah, I think it probably is the stuff that takes longer time to grow. So you definitely wouldn't need to do any fast growing mushrooms like that. And I've never had to do anything like that with shiitakes before.
I wonder if it'd be worth the time to try a totem of chicken of the woods without sterilizing it, just to see if it takes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, for me, because it takes 12 to 18 months, it's a good long time. So I'm gonna like go ahead and do it right instead of being like, well, that didn't work out, you know. But you know, it is good to experiment. And you know, this bag of sawdust was about $20. And so you're talking, you know, an inch. You're not really going to waste that much material. But again, I'm like, I'm going to wait 18 months for these mushrooms. I'm going to make sure I'm going to get some mushrooms, you know. So.
It's really nice to get into sterilization, because then you can get into taking that mushroom off of your log or off of your bag, harvesting the spores, turning those into your own sawdust, and getting into a whole realm of other mushrooms that are more delicate and aren't as competitive as these ones.
Right.
That really need the sterile environment. But then you can also use things like bird seed, like horse manure, and like rice or straw.
Yeah.
You can really cut your costs down.
Yeah.
And because this stuff you're buying in that bag
Right.
is sterilized.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you're paying for sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is them to do the pressure cookery.
Yeah.
But they just pressure cook that bag.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. This is very sterile. This is totally sterile. It's created in a sterile environment.
Sterilize it and then inoculate it when it cools off.
Yeah, they sterilize the sawdust and all the things that go in it, and beyond that, I'm not quite sure. But that's
With a liquid, a liquid suspension of the spore.
nice.
You can buy those online and from Stamets
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that's a whole nother like workshop. I do not consider myself an incredibly sterile person, so it's not anything that I've tried to get into. I'm happy to have people do this, and we are producing on a scale that I don't really feel like we need to get into all that, because it's a whole nother. Don't think so, but yeah, yeah, the indoor sterilization. You know, people. That's just a whole. It's a whole lot, but you know, for folks who are interested in it, there's definitely a lot out there to do for sure. All right, so let's try these, and kind of as we're doing this, we can talk a little bit about fast-growing mushrooms for folks. So somewhere, maybe over there, there's 2 plastic bags and some twine and maybe a box cutter or something. Yeah, great. The whole thing is great. Awesome. So these are just some leftover plastic bags. And I'm just going to turn it inside out because I'm not sure what was on the inside. So yeah, like I said, what we're going to do is, that looks great. Somebody mind opening up one of these oysters? We have 2 different, there's a knife in here. Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, sure. So we have 2 different types of oysters. We have an Italian oyster and a golden oyster. There's black oysters, there's blue oysters, there's a million different kind of oysters, pink oysters, just like a ton that you can do. The reason I picked these is, one, they have very high nutritional value, so they're incredibly good for like cholesterol issues and immunity boosting. The golden oyster is supposed to just be like a killer at market. So that's sort of like for, you know, people who really want a beautiful mushroom. That's why we're growing that one. But both of these, like I said, are really high in nutritional value. Almost all mushrooms are. It's one of the reasons I love them so much, in addition to them being perennials. So there's a lot of information out there about how good mushrooms are for us. So what we're just gonna do, and we'll do this with the plastic bags first. So like I said, we're trying to minimize contact with the ground. So we're gonna do about an inch. And Anthony and I probably cut way more totems than we need, but we'll see. So we're gonna do about a layer of about an inch. And I'm just gonna kind of break it up a little bit. And just get a nice even cover. I'm just trying to see how tall this is. That'll work. Maybe a little bit more. So that seems like about an inch to me. There we go. So now we're just gonna rest this on top. Yeah, use the end that, oh, that's probably not gonna work because it was stuck like that, but that's all right. So we're just gonna do like that. Make sure it's got a nice, for folks who can't see, there's just like a nice even cover underneath. And then we're just gonna repeat that between each wedge. And again, it's about an inch. Yep.
Have you ever experimented with drilling holes in the top and bottom and inoculating with either plugs or inserting the sawdust so the logs, stack real nice? Or it'd be a little more work. But have you ever done that? Drill holes in the top and bottom and then
With the totem method?
Yeah, stuff them with the sawdust spawn and then sit them flat on each other?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are pretty fast growing. We're gonna get fruiting 4 to 12 months. So yeah, I don't know if that would be like overkill.
Yeah, it might be.
One of the reasons they recommend this style, especially for totems, is because it's just super fast. You know what I mean? It's like, I've used half the bag and, it's like 10 minutes, we're gonna get all this done, And again, because Gabriel says that the oysters and other types of strain don't respond to a force. So there's no reason to try to shock them. They're not gonna respond. And that's why we go to all this effort with the Shiitake bolts, is because they respond to this shocking. All right, this is my Lego, see if I can Lego this up. Is that right? Something like that. Great. And then, yeah, we'll just do another. And if someone wants to cut out some twine there, yeah, you don't have to hold it up because we want to make sure it's not going to fall over.
Yeah, it looked like it was ready.
Yeah.
This guy's gonna wait.
Yeah.
Why do you make them so tall, Kathleen? Why couldn't you do stacks that were more like 6 inches?
That's a good question. This is what is recommended. My guess is you probably, there's certain, again, optimum amount of sawdust. If you just did one here, it's probably just not worth your effort. It's like you can go 6 feet tall with some of these, so.
But I was wondering if you cut the wood in half, you could get more sawdust in.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of like this amount of sawdust will use this much wood. Yeah. I think it's just mostly like that's how much that sawdust needs to eat.
Okay. So will that grow up into the log?
So it's gonna come out first. You'll see it come out the sides, and then then it might take over the whole thing. So.
Is this a one-shot deal or will you get it for the next year?
So yeah, they'll keep going until they're done. So I'm not sure how long this totem method lasts. Like I said, the bolts, it's 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure what the average lifespan of a totem is. I can't imagine it would last as long just because it's a softer hardwood, but that's just my speculation. So, how you say? We're just going to use that to wrap the top of the bag. So not too long. Definitely a couple years for sure. 5 years, I'm not sure, but you know. And then, so then this is it. Yeah, we'll just cap this off. And that's it. So now we're just gonna wrap this up. Hopefully, yeah, it's gonna have to be a little weird. We might have to like reinforce this.
We were talking about having something to hold it up.
Yeah. Let me just put a pallet. And again, you want it to be not super tight. There wants to be some airflow, but you don't want water to get in. So that's great. So that's totem. Pretty simple. Any questions there?
Do you do anything to hydrate that, or it's just going to...
Yeah, that's it. So 4 to 12 months, they say that it will take to inoculate that totem. So we'll check it in August. 8 months from 8 months. The 8th month of the, we're at 4th. So
You just like peek in that bag every week, or like how do you know? What do you?
So 4 months, it takes a minimum of 4 months. So we'll check it August, yeah.
And then every week in August, you're just like peeking in, or what do you think? Like.
What, I don't know, yeah. I probably won't check it every week, but we might. Yeah.
And it stays in that bag the whole time that you're using it.
Yeah, so once it starts, so you can tell when it's inoculated, when it's fully white on the outside. So if we check in August and there's nothing on the outside, then I'm probably going to close it up and not check it for a couple months. If it looks like some white is starting to show, you know, we'll probably check it a little more regularly, but it's pretty easy to see if it's inoculated or not. And then once it starts fruiting, you do uncover it. So it doesn't stay like that forever. Yes. And yeah.
Like, so if you had a stump and you did this and you took the wedges out, would you just put a bag over it and then tie it?
So you don't have to put a bag over it if you're going to use that wedge style. So if this was a stump, you'd cut out your wedges, kind of like pie wedges. Do the same thing. You put your layer in about 1 inch. You put your wedge back in, nail it back in, and then you just wait. Yeah.
Now, if you were going to do a less aggressive strain, one in which you did sterilize, how long would you leave it in the bag doing like a chicken of the woods? If you made a totem with that, how long would you wait?
Good question.
Okay.
That is a good question. Yeah, I don't have a ton of, this is my first year ever trying chicken of the woods. So I don't know very much about that and alternatives. Yeah.
So can you use other softwoods than poplar?
For oysters?
Yeah, for this method.
Yeah, there's a chart in some of those books that tells you all the different woods that you can't, you know, like most compatible, like okay, least compatible. So this is the most compatible. So that's why we're using these. Any other questions?
You were going to try one without the bag also?
Yeah, so we do have this newspaper that we're going to try. If anyone wants to work with me on that, I'm not quite sure how that's going to go, so I don't have any answers for that. We're going to try it and see how it works. We do have another plastic bag if anyone wants to try one with one of the taller totems. Yeah, we can do until we run out of spawn. I mean, I don't know that we're going to have that much spawn to do all of these, but maybe this super tall one, we can try another plastic bag and we try the newspapers with these other guys.
Do you want to re-wet that too?
You want to touch it or somebody just if that's pretty wet or not? Good wet. Okay, so we're good. Yeah, so if anybody wants to jump in, feel free. We can sort of talk about fast growing mushrooms while we're doing this if you want. Yeah.
You experimented much with straw bed oyster mushrooms?
Not oysters. We grow Stropharia wine caps with that sort of style here on the farm, but not oysters. Yeah. Mm.
They're kind of just all over the place.
Yeah, totally.
So they're not as pretty and clumpy as,
Mm.
as typical oysters, but she definitely is getting a lot of them, and she just has a bunch of straw and inoculated and just at the side of her house.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And a lot of times, like, so you can grow like lion's mane, oysters, shiitakes, chestnut mushrooms. You can get indoor growing kits, which is basically looks like this. Some of them are a little bit different, like how you do it. Yeah, there's one in the bathroom if you want to check it out. For oysters, you see that there's a valve here. This is a one-way valve. So what you would do is cut the top, and they all come with instructions. So it's not like you have to remember this, but you cut the top, roll it down, tape it off, make sure the valve is exposed, and then you cut little slits in it and spray it a couple times a day. That's all right. It's all good.
Yeah,
We'll figure it out.
get some steaks or something.
Okay. You want to grab some? Yeah. So when you're done with the indoor growing style, then you can use whatever is left over to inoculate things you have. So that's a cool way. So, you know, you buy the grow kit for $15, $25 or whatever, and then you can do like experiment with that. So once you have like a sterilized sawdust, you can try different things with that. So other fast growing mushrooms, like I said, we do wine caps, aka Stropharia here. Do you want to talk about how that came to be?
Yeah, I should say that they're doing themselves here. And we've had not so much last year, but previous year we probably got 100 pounds of them. But they really like wood chips. So if you've noticed out in our orchard, we have a lot of wood chips. Sometimes we use hay, but we put down cardboard and then wood chips on our perennials. And they just grow up under the trees. They grow up under rhubarb because the rhubarb's got big leaves. You know, wherever we have a lot of mulch, we've got a nice patch of them right outside our back window in the office. They've just kind of taken over on the farm. So when they come, they're very fragile. You know, a shiitake will last a couple days and hold its firmness in the refrigerator, but these guys are much more fragile. But they can get really big, and they look like they've been spray painted with gold paint on top. And you know that we have a lot of other mushrooms too, which I'm not sure of, and I don't want to use them because I'm afraid they might be deadly. But these guys have, they call them wine caps because they're purple underneath. If you pick them up and they're purple underneath, but they can get very big. And we just go crazy when they come in after a nice rain, and you've got some, you know, particularly mulchy wood chips or mulchy hay that's a little older. I don't know how they got here, but they're here.
Do you like the taste of them?
I do. Yeah.
I think that they were inoculated because in the old photos from the farm, there's wine cap spawn.
Yeah, they definitely were inoculated. So usually Stropharia, it's like a layered method. You start with bare dirt, and then you add straw and then wood chips on top. That's generally how a lot of people do it. Once you get that sort of inoculated matter, then you can kind of spread it more easily, but that's generally how it gets started.
Actually, yeah, I mean, I know one time we put it down in our blueberry patch across the street, but we haven't done anything. Only once we did that.
So you
It's
think
all over the farm now. So
somehow it's traveling?
Yeah, once you introduce it it will travel, but generally you have to introduce it. So it's not just going to show up. But once you introduce it, you'll have it, and it's a great mushroom. It's fast growing. This year we're trying Almond Agaricus, which is another sort of fast growing mushroom. It's got a different flavor, a different sort of profile look, and that grows on compost. And so we're just going to be doing that on compost, which will be fun. Almond Agaricus. Yeah, got that out of the Fedco catalog. Again, same thing, field forest, you can get it out of. So not everybody loves the taste of wine caps, so this is like a little different taste, a little meatier texture.
Do you like grow it on kitchen scraps compost or just like?
You want it fully composted, so nothing that's just like what we gave the chickens. Yeah, fully composted material.
And you just put it in the pile and it goes.
Yeah, so they say.
Mushrooms and vegetables.
That's right, yeah. Does anyone want to know a little bit about harvesting, optimum harvest, or does everyone feel good about that? All right, so these guys, we don't have anything that's like fully ready to harvest, but you can see you have like the stem and the cap. They tend to look a little bit more like this in the spring. Again, I think it's because we're getting so much sun, so I would say these are probably a little dried out. In the fall, they tend to be a little more brown on the top. Your traditional shiitake look. So you want to harvest them when the cap is not, just before it's fully flat. Does that make sense? So it's sort of like you see it goes like this, and then it sort of flattens out. So when it's got a little bit of curve to it still, that's your optimum. So, and right before the gills have really fully opened. And for us, we just twist them off. When you twist them off, you want to make sure to get all of the stem out. So if you don't get it when you twist them off, just cut them. But that's kind of the easiest for us. I know folks do use a harvest knife. Sometimes when you see that they are clustered like that, it gets a little bit hard because you don't want to really knock over, you don't really want to fool with the ones that you're not ready to harvest. So you just want to be delicate with it. And yeah, a lot of times when we're harvesting like that, like sometimes if there's mushrooms that are competing with other ones from growing, we might harvest them a little early just so that the other ones have room to grow. It's not going to affect you if you harvest it a little early. It's not like it's bad or anything like that. But any other questions about harvest or food preservation? Do you guys know about preserving the mushrooms? Or so you can keep them in the refrigerator. I would keep them in a paper bag a week or so. If you're worried about other things in your fridge, like say your fridge is like really high humidity, I would keep the bags open. And if you're worried about them going bad, I would just keep them on the counter. So if you keep them on the counter, they're more likely to dry up than rot. And that's fine because then you can just rehydrate them. Rotten mushrooms don't go near. If it smells bad, it's got some like sogginess to it, it's done. So don't go there. Yeah, definitely not a plastic bag. A lot of times you'll see that they have those like pint containers. Those are okay because they have little holes in them, those so they can breathe. Otherwise, for food preservation, I like to dehydrate them. I feel like it is just the easiest way. If you don't have a dehydrator, you can freeze them. I recommend you just put them on cookie sheets so they, have some separation instead of putting them all in a bag, and then you can freeze them that way. Some folks also freeze then dehydrate them. So that's a lot. Yeah.
I've heard that if you dry them on a screen under the sun, gill up towards the sun, they soak in vitamin D.
Totally, yeah. So a lot of folks do dry them outside, and I think you just want to keep them out of direct sunlight. But yeah, they dry really well, like on screens and stuff outside. So if you don't have a dehydrator. You were saying cap up, right? Yeah.